Hello everyone, Mobius1 here, and in this video I'm going to be going over the strengths of the different colored aspects in Star Wars Unlimited. While each aspect in Star Wars Unlimited has access to several major game mechanics, these aspect identities will help define which game mechanics the different deck colors are particularly proficient in performing. There will be some overlap, as some aspects share strengths with others, but I'll do my best to break down what you should expect to see when either playing or playing against each of these colors. Now, of course, this video is entirely my opinion, and while I'm sure many of you will agree with the points I make, some of you may not. I encourage those who don't to share their own thoughts in the comments below so the Star Wars Unlimited community as a whole can learn and grow. Also, while this video is mainly geared towards newer players, I welcome even Star Wars Unlimited experts to stick around and see how your opinions of each aspect compare to mine. With that out of the way, let's take a look at what aspects we have to talk about. There are 6 different aspect colors in Star Wars Unlimited: Aggression, Command, Cunning, Vigilance, Heroism, and Villainy. To be honest, Heroism and Villainy don't really have any strong identities on Unlimited, as they really just help align cards either being on the light side or the dark side, so we won't be discussing them in this video. Instead, we'll focus on the 4 primary aspect colors, starting with Aggression. Aggression is the most aptly named aspect in Star Wars Unlimited, as most of the Aggression cards are, well, aggressive. In Unlimited's first set, Spark of Rebellion, each of the 4 main aspects received a legendary card bearing that aspect's name. Each of these cards, when played, offers the player 4 different options to choose from, and those options are a great place to begin learning about what sort of mechanics you can expect from that color. In the case of Aggression, your choices are to draw a card, defeat up to 2 upgrades, ready a unit with 3 or less power, and deal 4 damage to a unit. As I said, these choices give you a quick look at Aggression's identity, but it doesn't paint a whole picture. Before we elaborate on the mechanics we see here, let's first take a look at what you're almost certainly going to see when going up against an Aggression deck: aggro units. Aggro units, while not an official term, are units that get most of their value out of attacking or in some way dealing damage to the opponent's base. This can come in several forms, such as the cheap 1-cost, 3-power Death Star Stormtrooper, or the 2-cost Green Squadron A-Wing, which may only be a 1/3 when defending, but with Raid 2 swings for 3 damage while attacking. With Unlimited's unique 1 action per turn gameplay, flooding the board with many cheap units can be a solid strategy, forcing your opponent to waste multiple actions responding to your numerous threats. Sure, you might spend 6 resources on 1 big unit, but that 1 big unit probably can't take out my 3 small units all at once. The aggressiveness of these types of decks is further fueled by certain leaders, such as Sabine from Spark of Rebellion or Anakin Skywalker from Twilight of the Republic. Sabine's symmetrical base damaging ability may seem bad at first. Why would you want to deal damage to your own base? Well, if your units are better and quicker at dealing damage to your opponent's base, that handful of damage you do to your own won't matter. And while Anakin's ability leans itself more towards a mid-range style of play rather than aggro, he still finds ways to use aggro units by damaging his own base to give them a temporary buff to their power when attacking enemy units. This allows the Aggression players' smaller, cheaper units to trade favorably with their opponent's more expensive units, outvaluing them over the course of a game. With a wide variety of units that deal damage to the enemy's base, or as with Spec Force Soldier here, remove potential Sentinel units from your opponent's board, allowing the rest of your forces to attack the enemy's base, you're certain to see at least a handful of aggro units whenever you play Aggression. The next core identity of Aggression, and one that we saw in the double aspect legendary card, is direct damage. Aggression is full of cards that deal damage directly to units, bases, and sometimes both. This can be another tool to help facilitate Aggression decks' game plan of racing down their opponent's base as quickly as possible, but also gives them the opportunity to pivot to a more board control style of play. If the Aggression players' aggro units are being efficiently removed by their opponent's larger units, a cheap direct damage card like Daring Raid or Open Fire could be used to finish off an otherwise annoying threat. Direct damage can come from units as well, not just events. Ruthless Raider, which deals 2 damage to both a unit and a base, both when played and when defeated, has been a staple in many aggression villainy decks lately. If you're up against a slow, grindy control deck that happens to be playing aggression, it's probably a safe bet they're running a Crate Dragon as a late-game win condition. And speaking of win conditions, for a cause I believe in has been a staple in aggression heroism decks as a way to close out games with a consistent 3 to 4 damage directly to base and no way for their opponent to stop it. Another major identity of aggression is the ability to ready their units, either through events like Keep Fighting and Bravado, or sometimes abilities baked right into the unit, like with Punishing One. Since aggression decks are generally looking to play aggro units and push for base damage, it's possible to see cards like these that allow those units to attack multiple times per round, though if I'm being honest, it's not as effective of a strategy as you might think, primarily because if your opponent does a decent job at keeping your board clear of units, ready-up cards are dead weight in your hand. It's often better and definitely more consistent to simply play another unit. Still, it's important to know that these effects exist in the game. An alternative version of this mechanic you will see regularly involves units that enter play ready. This usually has some sort of condition that needs to be met, like having a certain amount of damage on a base for Guerrilla Attack Pod, or your opponent having more units than you for Savage Oppress. But sometimes it's as simple as paying a little extra in the form of a smuggle cost, like with Cassian Andor. This allows aggression decks to catch their opponents off guard with units that can attack base the round they're played, often resulting in game-ending plays that seem to come out of nowhere. Upgrade removal is another mechanic that aggression has access to. Being able to play a unit and remove an upgrade with a card like Disabling Fangfighter allows the aggression player to potentially 2-for-1, squeezing some extra value out of their cards. Poe, on the other hand, allows the aggression player to give up a potentially useless card from their hand for the same effect. And while a card like Power Failure may not see a ton of play currently, keep in mind that the new piloting mechanic coming in Set 4, Jump to Lightspeed, involves playing units as upgrades onto vehicles. If that mechanic takes off, pun totally intended, upgrade removal will be an important way to counter decks that rely on it. The last of the 4 mechanics we saw on the Aggression Legendary was card draw. Drawing more cards than your opponent gives you card advantage, which, simply put, means you have more options to choose from when responding to whatever situation you may be facing. Like other mechanics we've already seen, card draw can come in the form of events that simply draw you more cards, like Mission Briefing, or as a result of abilities, such as Anakin Skywalker's On Attack. Some cards, like Heroic Sacrifice, have a separate effect, but also replace themselves in your hand by drawing a card. Some aggression leaders are even entirely focused on drawing cards, like Cassian Andor, who lets you draw cards after damaging your opponent's base, something we've already said aggression decks love doing, or Pre-Vizsla, who lets you deal damage to units equal to the number of cards you've drawn in the current phase. And lastly, for aggression, while you're drawing more cards, why not get rid of your opponents? Discard is another major identity, with event cards like Force Throw and Pillage, but even units like K2SO, which has a when defeated ability that lets you force your opponent to discard a card from their hand. There aren't many things more satisfying in Star Wars Unlimited than playing a Pillage when your opponent only has 2 cards remaining in hand, or watching your opponent sweat, knowing that if they trade into your K2SO, they may have to lose the only card they have left. If you're playing aggression and you do decide to run Force Throw specifically, don't forget that you can choose yourself as the target, meaning if you have a Force unit, you can discard your own expensive cards to deal massive damage to enemy units. Just recently, I used Force Throw on myself, discarding my own 9-cost Crate Dragon, clearing the way to win the game. And speaking of discarding your own cards, that's not such a crazy thing when you're playing a leader such as Kylo Ren, who wants to discard his own cards. Not only does his leader ability allow him to discard cards in order to buff the attack power of a unit for the phase, but once deployed, his normally high power of 5 is reduced by the number of cards in hand, so the fewer the better. There are other synergies with this mechanic as well, such as Kylo's tie being able to still be played from the discard pile, or Miggs Mayfeld, who lets you deal 2 damage to something when any player discards a card. Overall, aggression is definitely the right word to describe this aspect. Dealing damage quickly and ensuring you have the tools to win the game while your opponent doesn't is what aggression is all about. If I were to use one word to describe the green command aspect, it'd be versatility. Command has access to an incredibly wide range of game mechanics, meaning it can pair well and provide support to just about any other color in the game, or even do well when doubled up by having both a green leader and base. The 4 choices provided by Command's legendary card are: give 2 experience tokens to a unit, have a friendly unit deal damage equal to its power to a non-unique enemy unit, put the event into play as a resource, and return a unit from your discard pile to your hand. Once again, all of these options perfectly showcase some of what Command cards are capable of. Let's start by talking about resources. In TCG terms, ramping is using cards or abilities to generate more resources than your opponent, usually losing a bit of tempo early in the game in order to come back later in the game by playing more expensive cards than your opponent can. If you're looking to do that in Star Wars Unlimited, Command is the aspect for you. Playing the resupply event for 3 resources lets you start all future rounds with 1 resource more than your opponent, and if you can capitalize on that fact with your other cards, giving up on playing an early unit may not be a terrible strategy. However, Command has other ways of ramping, such as the 3-cost unit Super Laser Technician, which not only becomes a resource when it's defeated, it becomes a ready resource, meaning you can use it right away. Maybe paying 3 resources to ramp is a little too expensive for you. In that case, Spark of Hope lets you pay only 2. You just have to have had a unit get defeated earlier in the phase. Ramping in Unlimited is actually slightly more powerful of a mechanic than in most other card games, thanks to leaders. Since leaders require players to reach a certain number of resources before they can be deployed, ramping allows you to get your leader into play quicker than you otherwise would, which can help take back control of the game and lead to swift victories. You know what else you can play with all of your resources after ramping? Big units. Command has more high-costing units than any other aspect in the game, and they're not just big blocks of stats either. Some of the abilities that these units bring to the table can completely shut down certain strategies for your opponent. Relentless, for example, makes it so that the first event your opponent plays each round does nothing, while Devastator not only deals massive damage to a unit when it enters play, but also has Sentinel, blocking any enemy space units from hitting your base. If you're up against a Command deck and you think you got the game in the bag as your opponent reaches the 9 or 10 resource count, be prepared for a possible upset. Not every Command deck, however, likes to go tall with big units. Others prefer to go wide with many units. With cards like Manufactured Soldiers, Command decks are capable of establishing a wide board presence early in the game by generating multiple token units. In the later stages of the game, cards like U-Wing Reinforcements allow the Command player to dig into their deck and play multiple small units in an attempt to overwhelm their opponent. While a little too pricey to see much actual play, the ultimate form of this is seen with the legendary card Endless Legions. For a whopping 14 resources plus the double green aspect requirement, Endless Legions allows the Command player to reveal any of their previously resourced cards and play each unit revealed that way for free, potentially turning their entire stockpile of resources into a massive board all in one action. Once the Command player has a wide board of meta units, they can then play cards that synergize with that fact, such as Rebel Assault, allowing them to attack with 2 Rebel units at once, or Admiral Akbar, which deals damage to an enemy unit based on the number of friendly units in the target's arena. Cards like these give Command players the potential to utilize small, weak units in a way that other aspects can't. Playing the card Attack Pattern Delta, for instance, would turn 3 measly 1/1 Battle Droid tokens into a 4/4, a 3/3, and a 2/2 for the phase, which leads us nicely into the next mechanic Command specializes in: unit buffs. The Command aspect has many ways to both temporarily and permanently buff up their units, like with Vanguard Infantry, which, when it's defeated, gives an experience token to a unit, buffing it by +1/+1. The upgrade Inspiring Mentor not only buffs the attached unit by +1/+1, but also allows it to give other friendly units experience tokens both each time it attacks, as well as when it's defeated. Cards like these allow Command decks to turn even the puniest units into considerable threats. Your opponent might not have wanted to waste an action taking out a 2/2 Clone Trooper token, but if that token unit is suddenly handing out free experience each time it attacks, it has to be dealt with before things get out of control. Clone Commander Cody may have Overwhelm himself, but if you can activate his Coordinate ability by having at least 3 units in play, he gives each of your other units +1/+1 and Overwhelm 2. And as we just discussed, having 3 units in play can be quite trivial when playing Command. Once you have a nice board of big or many units and get them nice and buffed up with experience tokens, it's time to take advantage of Command's next major mechanic, which for this video I'm calling Unit Damage. It's similar to direct damage that we saw back in Aggression, but the amount of damage dealt is based on the power of a friendly unit. Playing Strike True lets you take the power of any of your units and deal that much damage to any enemy unit, even if they're not in the same arena. Overwhelming Barrage, which is arguably one of the best cards in the game, does both buff a unit and then deal damage equal to its power, split however you'd like among other units. The upcoming legendary card Turbo Laser Salvo lets a friendly space unit deal damage equal to its power to every enemy unit in one of the 2 arenas, which can single-handedly win games against certain decks. The best part about this mechanic? In each of these cases, the friendly unit is not considered to be attacking, meaning you can use these events to deal damage and still attack with the unit afterwards. The opposite order is also true. You can use these events on exhausted units and still deal damage. It's an incredibly powerful mechanic. If you are going to be ramping early in the game in hopes of coming back big in the end game, you might be concerned that your opponent is going to race you down and win before you have time for your plan to unfold. In that case, you'll need something to help keep you alive, such as Restore. While not as proficient in base healing as the blue Vigilance aspect, Command does have access to a handful of ways to help keep you healthy while you build up your resources. Colonel Yularen heals your base for 1 HP each time you play a Command unit, including himself, and the Consortium Star Viper gains Restore 2 while you have the initiative. Both of those units can be played early in the game, but Reinforcement Walker offers a sturdy late-game healing option along with some flexibility with the when played and on attack to draw a card and choose to either keep it or discard it and heal your base for 3. Potentially healing for 3 while attacking for 6 each turn is impressive, but having the option to simply keep the extra card if you don't need the healing makes it most impressive. On top of keeping your base nice and healthy, Command also has a small collection of cards that can revive units after they've been sent to your discard pile. The Emperor's Legion is a cheap way to get each unit that was defeated in the current phase back to your hand, while Palpatine's Return lets you pay 6 resources to immediately replay a unit from your discard pile at a 6 cost discount, or 8 if it's a Force unit. On the heroism side, Home 1 is the complete package. It's a big unit, has Restore 2, gives each other friendly unit Restore 1, and lets you play a unit from your discard pile with a discount of 3. With cards like these, your opponent may put a whole lot of effort into defeating one of your late-game units only to be caught off guard when it returns. Somehow. The last Command mechanic I'd like to quickly mention is Ambush. Ambush, which lets a unit ready and attack an enemy unit as soon as it's played, is seen more prominently in the Cunning aspect, but Command does have a few noteworthy uses of it. Firstly, both Darth Vader and Maul are 7-drops that have Ambush, are cards that see quite a bit of play, and are something you should expect to encounter when going up against Command villainy. In addition, Admiral Piet may only be a non-threatening 1/4, but grants Ambush to any unit played that costs 6 or more, making him a non-issue in the early game, but a must-kill in the late game. Command also has ways to give any unit Ambush, first with the most played rare base in the game, Energy Conversion Lab, and also the event Timely Intervention. This means that it's possible for a Command player to sometimes deal with a unit of yours immediately and leave behind a body, even if you weren't expecting it. Command is not only the best aspect when it comes to both tall and wide boards, but it's also pretty good at so many other mechanics in Star Wars Unlimited, making it the go-to color choice for many competitive decks. The yellow aspect of Cunning is the aspect of disruption. The game plan of many Cunning decks is to simply ruin your opponent's game plan, and there are several ways to go about doing exactly that. The 4 choices of the Cunning legendary card are: return a non-leader unit with 4 or less power to its owner's hand, give a unit +4/+0 for the phase, exhaust up to 2 units, and have an opponent discard a random card from their hand. As you can see, 3 of these options involve some sort of messing with your opponent. Let's take a closer look at how these effects give most players a bad feeling about this when they sit down and see their opponent is playing Cunning. A lot of what Cunning uses to disrupt their opponents involves event cards, so it makes sense that a decent number of Cunning units synergize with events. Instead of attacking, Bib Fortuna can be exhausted in order to play an event with a 1-cost discount, and each time you play an event with Bosk in play, you can deal 2 damage to a unit. Events are common across all aspects in Star Wars Unlimited, but Cunning finds ways to squeeze a bit more value out of them than the others. You'd be hard-pressed to find a Cunning deck that isn't running at least a handful of events, and definitely not one using Asajj Ventress as a leader, who, on attack, if you've played an event earlier in the phase, gets +1 power and deals combat damage before the defender. The first type of disruption we'll talk about is exhaustion. Cunning has multiple different event cards that find ways to exhaust enemy units, preventing them from attacking. No Good to Me Dead not only exhausts a unit, but makes it so that it doesn't ready during that round's regroup phase, leaving it exhausted going into the next round as well. Outmaneuver is an event with a symmetrical effect of exhausting each unit in a given arena, and sure, that includes your units, but if you're only playing space units and your opponent has ground units, or maybe you only have 1 ground unit and you've already attacked with it, the downside of the card may not be felt. It's hard to win games when you can't attack with your units, and the upgrade Frozen and Carbonite leaves the attached unit permanently exhausted, but don't worry, it's still alive and in perfect hibernation. While Cunning certainly does love its events, they're not the only way they can exhaust units. Many Cunning units come with exhaustion effects as well, such as Grogu, who may have an attack power of 0, but can exhaust himself to exhaust any other unit, including leaders. Both Leia Organa and Cartel Spacer can also exhaust a unit when they're played, meaning if the Cunning player has the initiative, they can play either of these units to stop their opponent's units from doing anything for a round. If exhausting units sounds like a great form of disruption, we're just getting started. Another good trick Cunning likes to try, no, not spinning, bounce. Bouncing in TCGs is the act of returning cards to a player's hand, and Cunning does this extremely well. For only 3 resources, the event Waylay returns a non-leader unit to its owner's hand, and the 5-cost unit Cantina Bouncer does the same thing, but comes with a 3/5 body as well. While returning units to hand may not be a permanent method of eliminating them, there are several benefits to this method of removal. Firstly, the tempo gained by playing a 3-cost Waylay to potentially return a more expensive unit puts the Cunning player ahead in terms of value and resources spent. If you pay 8 resources for one of those big reinforcement walkers we just saw when we were talking about command, and your opponent returns it to your hand by only paying 3, they just gained a 5 resource advantage over you for the round. The second advantage Bounce has over regular means of removal is that it doesn't trigger when defeated abilities. Since returning a unit to hand is not the same as defeating it, units with when defeateds would not resolve their abilities when bounced. Things get even more scary when you add Enfys Nest to the picture, who, when played and on attack, can return an enemy non-leader unit to its owner's hand if its power is less than hers, meaning she can potentially bounce multiple enemy units back to hand before she's dealt with. Cunning takes it a step further with cards specifically designed for returning your own units to your hand. McClunky, for instance, costs 1 to return a friendly non-leader Underworld unit to your hand, and if you do, deals 3 damage to a unit. Triple Dark Raid lets you search the top 7 cards of your deck for a vehicle unit and play it with a 5-cost discount. The unit enters play ready, meaning you can attack with it in the same phase, but at the end of the phase, it returns to your hand. A new adventure blinks a unit that costs 6 or less, meaning it returns to its owner's hand and then allows that player to immediately play the unit again for free. These effects may seem strange at first, but just like bouncing a unit avoids triggering its when defeated, it also allows you to trigger a when played ability twice. If you have units with powerful when played effects, paying 1 to return it to your hand so that you can play it again later is actually quite strong. And don't forget, when a unit is bounced, any damage on it is removed and any upgrades attached to it are defeated. Another way Cunning likes to disrupt their opponents is through discard. Discard was a mechanic we saw back in Aggression, but Cunning does it just as well, if not better. The biggest difference between discard in Aggression and Cunning is that most of the Cunning cards that discard allow you to look at your opponent's hand and choose the card to discard yourself rather than your opponent. As you can see, Spark of Rebellion lets you look at your opponent's hand, then choose a card they have to discard. Bodhi Rook is a 3/3 unit that lets you see your opponent's hand, then discard a non-unit card from it. This means that not only are you taking cards out of your opponent's hand, you're also getting information on what other cards they still have, which can help you make better decisions during the game. When you make an opponent discard a card with Bazine Natal, they do get to draw a replacement card, but did you notice that Bazine has the Underworld trait, meaning you could use McClunky from the last group of cards we saw to bounce her back to your hand and play her again? Also, she can be smuggled into play, which, speaking of, smuggle is the next mechanic that Cunning uses. Sure, there are smuggle cards in every aspect, but the ones available to Cunning see the most play. Smuggle was a mechanic introduced in Star Wars Unlimited's first expansion set, Shadows of the Galaxy. Smuggle adds a second cost to a card, and if that card is a resource, allows a player to pay that smuggle cost to play the card from their resource zone, replacing it with the top card of their deck. So if you were to start the game with Millennium Falcon here in your opening hand, you could make it one of your initial 2 resources, then later in the game, pay its smuggle cost to play it anyway. L337's When Played lets you rescue a captured card from an opponent. If you're not sure your opponent is going to be capturing any of your units, you can make L3 a resource, and if it turns out they do capture something, you still have access to her. This means that even when a Cunning player is running low on cards, they may yet have some tricks up their sleeves in the form of smuggle. Some cards' smuggle cost requires different aspects than their normal cost. Hotshot DL44 Blaster, for example, is normally a 1-cost aggression upgrade, but through smuggle becomes a 3-cost Cunning upgrade that allows you to attack immediately with the attached unit. We'll discuss a particularly nasty smuggle combo a little later in the video, but for now, let's stay focused on the Hotshot DL44. This blaster is both a good example of smuggle as well as the next mechanic Cunning employs to close out games: Burst. Burst is a mechanic that allows units to deal massive damage very quickly, usually through temporary increases to their attack power. Surprise Strike is an auto-include in many Cunning decks, as getting a surprise 3 extra damage out of an attack is a great way to unsuspectingly win games. Breaking In may only grant an extra +2 power instead of 3, but the addition of Saboteur allows the unit to bypass enemy sentinels. Suspecting that a Cunning player could be holding a burst card or 2 in their hand can leave players feeling uneasy anytime they have to leave a unit unopposed. They'll constantly be wondering if that innocent-looking 3/3 is about to hit their base for a whopping 6 damage instead. As we saw earlier, one of the options of the Cunning legendary card is to give a unit +4/+0 for the phase, not just an attack, meaning whatever unit you target with that effect will keep the buff even after it attacks, helping defend itself against would-be attackers. Another way Cunning players can surprise opponents is with Ambush. While Command also has a decent number of ambush units, Cunning has a couple of synergies that really elevate the ability. Having consistent access to a 2-cost 3/1 ambush with Cloud Rider means that as early as turn 1, Cunning decks can immediately deal with 3 HP units, but as the resource numbers go up, so does the power of the effects. At 7 resources, Cunning Heroism decks can play Han Solo, a 6/6 ambush unit that deals combat damage before the opponent, meaning if his 6 attack power is enough to defeat the defender, he walks away from combat unscathed. With the addition of Set 3, Twilight of the Republic, Cunning Heroism also gained Plo Koon. For only 5 resources, Plo Koon is at a minimum a 3/6 ambush unit, but if you happen to have at least 2 other units in play, he gains Raid 3, ambushing for 6 damage, which is nuts. Just like with events, Cunning has ways of getting a bit of extra value out of ambush. When Chaincode Collector ambushes into a unit, if that unit has a bounty on it, the defender gets -4 power for the attack, leaving most units nearly defenseless. Similarly, this version of Enfys Nest from Shadows of the Galaxy not only has ambush herself, but makes it so that whenever a friendly unit is attacking with ambush, the defender gets -3 power. That could be pretty effective, especially when paired with Fennec Shand as a leader whose ability lets you play a unit that costs 4 or less and give it ambush. Burst and ambush aren't the only methods of surprises when it comes to Cunning. Just like with aggression, Cunning shares a collection of ways to bring units into play ready. Whether that be Millennium Falcon Piece of Junk, which simply enters play ready, or the event Sneak Attack, which allows any unit to enter play ready, but gets defeated at the start of the regroup phase. Even Fett's Fire Spray allows you to ready the unit when played as long as you control either Boba or Jango Fett. Combine cards like these with some of the burst cards we looked at earlier, and you can see how Cunning decks can easily steal wins out from under their opponent's noses. Speaking of stealing, the last sort of mechanic that Cunning specializes in is exactly that, stealing. Whether it's temporarily stealing a unit with Change of Heart, or smuggling DJ into play to steal an opponent's resource, Cunning players tend to have sticky fingers. Even Unrefusable Offer, an upgrade that adds a bounty to the attached unit, costs as little as 2 resources, and when the attached unit is captured or defeated, the Cunning player gets to play it for free and ready it up. Even if it only lasts for 1 round, getting control of one of your opponent's expensive units for such little cost can be huge. But really, we need to talk about the Han Solo DJ Smuggle combo, because at least right now, this combo is dominating the meta. Han Solo Audacious Smuggler's leader ability allows him to put a card from his hand into play as a resource. Later, at the start of the next action phase, he then has to defeat a resource he controls. Enter DJ. If DJ is smuggled into play, the player gets to take control of an enemy resource until DJ leaves play, at which point they would get that specific resource back. Unfortunately, when you combine these two effects, you get a nasty little combo. If Han's leader ability is used, then a resource is stolen by DJ. If that resource is not returned to its owner by the start of the next action phase, the Cunning player can choose to defeat the stolen resource to satisfy the condition for Han's ability, meaning that even when DJ leaves play, there is no longer a stolen resource to return. This lets Cunning players not only steal resources, but straight up destroy them from opponents. I guess some people can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some people just want to watch the world burn. Sorry, wrong movie franchise. The final aspect we'll be talking about in this video is my personal favorite, Vigilance. Vigilance is the aspect of control, and while we don't have any counter spells in Star Wars Unlimited yet, blue Magic the Gathering players will feel right at home here. The legendary Vigilance card allows you to discard 6 cards from an opponent's deck, heal 5 damage from a base, defeat a unit with 3 or less remaining HP, and give a shield token to a unit. Unquestionably, the main mechanic in Vigilance is removal, and boy is there a lot of it. Removal is, as the name suggests, using card abilities to remove your opponent's units from play. Starting with the most basic form, Vanquish is a 5-cost event that allows the Vigilance player to defeat any non-leader unit. For 1 more resource, Rival's Fall removes that restriction and can even defeat leaders. Part of the reason Vigilance villainy control decks are so powerful is in part to the event Super Laser Blast, which clears the board of all units, both enemy and friendly. The different types of removal options available to Vigilance is sort of a balancing act between how many resources you want to pay and how restrictive your target selection is. For example, Takedown is 1 resource cheaper than Vanquish, but can only defeat units with 5 or less remaining HP. Similarly, Fell the Dragon also costs 4, but can only be used to remove units with 5 or more power. Power of the Dark Side is an incredibly cheap removal option at only 3 resources, but your opponent is the one who decides which unit is the one that gets defeated. Giving your opponent options is usually a bad thing, but if you're able to manipulate the board into a state where all of their options are good for you, like maybe leaving them with only 1 unit, you can see how strong the card can actually be. In addition to removing enemy units, Vigilance also has ways of shrinking them with debuffs. Perilous Position is an upgrade that not only gives the attached unit a permanent -2/-2, but also exhausts it if it was ready. Make an Opening is also an event that gives a unit -2/-2, although temporary, but also heals 2 damage from your base. Debuffing units is generally cheaper than removing them entirely. Once enemy units are debuffed, they're both easier to remove with your units and also less of a threat when attacking you. I Have the High Ground lets you choose a friendly unit, and for the rest of the phase, if an enemy unit attacks that unit, the attacker gets -4 power for the attack, making them question whether or not they should try it, or if you're simply underestimating their power. Vigilance's other major strength is healing, and we'll start by looking at ways they can heal their base. While Command had access to a bit of Restore, Vigilance is where you'll find it most, with units like Restored Arc 170 that heal your base each time they attack. Vigilance offers more ways to keep your base healthy than simple units with the Restore keyword. For instance, the client has an action he can use to put a bounty on a unit for the phase. If that unit is captured or defeated while the bounty is active, the Vigilance player gets to heal 5 damage from a base. Top Target is an upgrade that also gives the attached unit a bounty that, when claimed, heals a unit or a base for 4 or 6 HP, depending on whether the attached unit was unique. As you can see, Vigilance is capable of not only healing your base, but units too. Covert Strength not only allows you to heal 2 damage from a unit, but also give it an experience token, buffing it by +1/+1. Gentle Giant heals damage from a friendly unit equal to its power, and with Grit, its power goes up the more damage it takes. Redemption is a great example of a late-game healing tool, allowing you to essentially give up to 8 of its own HP to any other units or bases when it enters play. Vigilance really is all about outlasting your opponent, and healing is a great way to do exactly that. Another great way to outlast your opponent is through protection effects like Sentinel. When a unit goes to attack, if there are any enemy Sentinel units in the attacking unit's arena, it must choose one of those as the target of the attack. Once again, Sentinel is not a mechanic exclusive to Vigilance, but it does have more Sentinel units than any other color. For only 2 resources, Pike Sentinel can absorb at least 1 attack from any of your opponent's ground units. Lieutenant Childsin is another amazing unit for Vigilance villainy control, allowing you to, when he's played, reveal up to 4 other Vigilance cards from your hand and give him an experience token for each, meaning he could become as large as a 6/6 for only 4 resources. Combining Sentinel with other Vigilance mechanics like unit healing can help block out your opponent from attacking both your base as well as other more fragile units. Village Protectors features another Star Wars Unlimited protection mechanic, Shielded. With the Shield token preventing the first source of damage, no matter how large, Village Protectors can take at least 2 hits before being defeated. Shield tokens are another tool in the Vigilance protection arsenal, keeping units safe behind a barrier that must be popped before the unit itself can be damaged. Some units, like Cargo Juggernaut, have the shielded keyword and come into play with a shield token already on them. Others, like the Armorer, can pass out shield tokens to other units with their win plate ability. Shield tokens may be vulnerable to the Saboteur keyword as well as upgrade removal, but if your opponent doesn't have either of those handy, it can really throw a Hydro Spanner in their plans. When Lam Pike attacks, you may choose to give an enemy unit a shield token, and if you do, give a shield token to a friendly unit as well. That seems like a strange symmetrical effect at first, but if you're planning on using a removal card like Takedown on an enemy unit, why not lead your opponent into a false sense of security first by giving that unit a shield token it'll never get to benefit from? Again, overlapping a bit with Command, because Vigilance is all about outlasting your opponent, it has access to some pretty big late-game units. Since most Vigilance cards are defensive or less aggressive, these late-game bombs are usually Vigilance's win conditions. Each example I've featured here also showcases a mechanic we just looked at. Avenger is a massive 8/8 Star Destroyer for 9 resources and is essentially removal in unit form. Both when it's played and each time it attacks, your opponent must choose one of their non-leader units to defeat. Supreme Leader Snoke may only be a 6/6 body for 8 resources, but while he's in play, all enemy non-leader units are debuffed by -2/-2. Luke Skywalker features both base healing as well as debuffs with Restore 3 and his when played giving a unit -3/-3 or -6/-6 if a friendly unit was defeated earlier in the phase. Since we're talking about Luke and Snoke, while it's not really a mechanic and more of a trait, it's worth mentioning that Vigilance also currently has access to more Force units than any other aspect in the game. Not only are these units decently powerful in their own rights, they can also enable synergies with many other Force-themed cards. Notice again that each of the cards featured here show off a major Vigilance mechanic, Obi-Wan Kenobi being Sentinel and Force synergy, Count Dooku being shielded and removal, and Yoda being restore and card draw. Oh yeah, card draw. While not as focused on card draw as aggression, Vigilance still has many options for drawing more cards. If your deck is full of cards you're hoping to use to remove your opponent's units, you'll need a way to draw those cards so you have them when you need them. Dr. Pershing lets you deal 1 damage to a friendly unit in order to start drawing cards as early as turn 2. When Kuil attacks, the player must discard the top card of their deck. However, if the discarded card shares an aspect color with the Kuil player's base, they get to draw the card instead. Ki-Adi-Mundi has a coordinate ability that lets its controller draw 2 cards when their opponent plays their second card each phase. The last thing we'll cover with Vigilance is Mill. The very first option on the legendary Vigilance card allows you to discard 6 cards from an opponent's deck. This sort of effect in TCGs is known as milling. In Star Wars Unlimited, whenever you go to draw a card from an empty deck, your base takes 3 damage. Since each player draws 2 cards during the regroup phase, that's 6 damage each time your deck is empty. The mill strategy aims to use that fact to win games. Cards like Vigilance and Kanan Jarrus, which discards cards from the opponent's deck based on the number of friendly Spectre units you control, himself included, have been in the game since the first set. Still, the tools for a competitive mill deck are really just starting to exist, with the most recent Unlimited card set adding Satine Kryze. Satine gives each unit in play the ability to exhaust itself and force an opponent to discard cards from their deck equal to half of its remaining HP, rounded up. This means any unit with a high HP value can suddenly become a milling machine, forcing your opponent to throw away card after card from the top of their deck. Now, truthfully, mill still needs a bit of support to truly be competitive. Most units with high HP values that are worth running are better off just attacking the enemy base, but if we get a bit more mill support in the future, this may be a mechanic you'll have to watch out for. And that's it for Vigilance. Healing, protecting, removing enemy units, and shrinking them with debuffs are all things you can expect to see from this aspect. I hope this video has helped you better understand the different mechanics that give each of the aspects in Star Wars Unlimited their core identities. If you learned anything from this video, or if you found it helpful at all, consider leaving a like and a comment, as it helps my channel with the only thing worse than Rise of Skywalker, the YouTube algorithm. When it comes to deck building, Star Wars Unlimited offers, well, unlimited possibilities. If you think I missed an important part of your favorite aspect's identity, I'd also love to hear about it in the comments. While new cards are released and old cards rotate out of standard, these core identities should remain more or less the same over time. If not, I'll be sure to make an updated version of this video in the future. Thank you all for watching. Mobius1 here, and may the Force be with you.